thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We are excited. We're going to talk a little bit about how are we going to navigate this online learning that our children are doing, in particular for our children that have vision deficiencies or children that are going to struggle simply because of the digital world that we're now learning on for a lot of our kids. So I'm going to review how do we devise or how do we implement accommodations for kids in this new environment. And because of that, we're going to discuss the differences between an IEP, an individual education plan, a 504 plan, or are some of the things we can implement on our own at home. So we're going to review that a little bit, and then we'll jump into the accommodations, and we'll take questions at the end. So traditionally, this is how we, think of school: paper, pencil, chalkboard. But in our new environment now, for a lot of our kids that are doing online or distance learning, we're now faced with the new struggles that come from digital devices. So we're going to have laptops, headphones, Google Classrooms. We're going to be navigating different types of software and spending a lot more time visually on a screen, which in particular our kids are not traditionally used to. So what sort of challenges are these new devices going to arise, or challenges are they going to present to the visual system in particular? So we may end up with a little boy such as this. You'll see right now we've got a really poor slumped over posture, a really low core tone. We've got a chin tucked, and if you look at the eyes in particular, we're looking in what we call up gaze. We're pulling our eyes upward, which is actually not a really comfortable position for viewing. We may have a little boy such as this, and if, when you first glance at this picture, it may not look, you may not notice anything that could be potentially alarming, but what I see here when I look at this is a child that has an extremely close working distance. And by that, I mean he's probably only 8 inches from the screen. And that creates a significant amount of strain on the visual system for seeing, for focusing. The eyes have to converge and point inward at a very close distance. And to do that for a prolonged period of time is going to create a lot of strain on the visual system, and it can cause a lot of problems if this persists for more than a few minutes or days. We may have a child trying to learn in this type of posture. So in this posture, and a lot of kids feel really comfortable laying down on their tummy, but for reading and for looking, this posture is really not appropriate. You're going to see right now we've got the neck in full extension. We do have the eyes a little bit more in up gaze. She has an extremely close working distance. You can't quite see the screen of that monitor. She's probably only 6 inches from the monitor. And then attempting to try to type and get the hand in there, that's just putting so much strain on the whole system. This is just a really poor and inefficient way to learn. So I just wanted to point out some of these things that we may encounter, and going to talk about how we can create a visual problem. But just some simple things before we get into a little bit more discussion on this. I just wanted to review some basic posture or ergonomics that can really help with the visual system. Now, this is kind of a setup someone traditionally like in an office setting, but a lot of our kids are essentially attempting to do this now for 6 hours or more during the day. So I just wanted to point out some really common things that we should all be aware of, and then they may apply to even you in your office job or your day-to-day activities when you're using a computer. One of the first things that you want to try to align is to have your gaze to a point where if you're looking straight ahead, your eyes should be able to just be over the top of the monitor. And so when you go to look down, when you look into the middle of the screen, your eyes are going to go slightly into a down gaze. And that's going to be one of the more comfortable directions for viewing. We want to be slightly down. So you may need to raise the laptop up, or you may need to raise your chair up to get that positioning. So you could simply put a laptop on a box or some kind of device that could raise it, or you could get on a chair that's able to go up or down. The next thing you want to see is that we want to try to get, if we have to type, we want to try to get that elbow at a 90-degree angle. So again, that's going to require you to be in a chair that's somehow going to keep you upright and not allow you to slunch over. Keyboard directly in front of you, if at all possible. Now, this may not be as relevant for kids that aren't doing a lot of typing. You want to have something to rest your wrists on. It may be more relevant for an adult. But one thing that definitely would be really helpful for kids is to allow their feet to touch the floor. You may need to put a stool under their chair. A lot of us don't have kid-sized tables or chairs at home. So put a little stool under their desk, something where their feet can actually rest, something they can press down firmly onto it. So these are just some of the simple little things ergonomically, how we could try to set up the distance. And the other thing, which I know I'll touch on later, is that you want to try to get a substantial distance away from that screen. More than 20 inches would be ideal, especially if they're not having to type while they're looking and they're simply following along with the lesson with the teacher. We want to try to get them as far back from the screen as possible. So moving forward now, so this is just kind of a way to introduce us into some things we're going to be talking about. But now, when we have students that have visual deficiencies or impairments or challenges, a lot of our students actually require a lot more assistance in the classroom to help them manage or deal with their visual challenge. So now we're just going to kind of briefly talk about special education and the laws that surround it, and how do we get these accommodations formally into place. So it all kind of centers around the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And this act has been modified several times over the years, but you know, the most recent modification to it really defines the purpose is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them free and appropriate public education. And that is with an emphasis to emphasize special ed and related services designed to meet their unique needs, prepare them for further education, prepare them for employment, and eventually independent living. And the purpose of providing this is to allow the child to receive this in the least restrictive environment. Now, with online distance learning, we're finding that a lot of children are not really having their needs met with these laws because of the restrictions that, you know, this type of teaching method imposes. So it really is a struggle right now for kids who require these types of services in this online environment. But just to kind of go a little bit deeper, the free and appropriate public education, or abbreviated as FAPE, is an individual education program, and it's designed to meet the child's unique needs. So he'll receive, or she will receive, educational benefit. Again, prepare them for further education, employment, independent living. That's kind of the goal of these services, is to allow these kids to, once they graduate high school, we hope they'll get a job. We hope they'll be productive members of society, and all these services are designed to get them to that point. So in order to follow the rules of the IDEA law, we have 14 disability categories, and they range from autism, deaf, developmental delay, hearing impairment, orthopedic impairment. Number 11, which is specific learning disability, is the most common category, and that's where dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, all those types of disabilities fall under. That's traumatic brain injury, speech language impairment. And then all the way at the bottom, we have number 14, visual impairment, which includes someone who is blind. So that's what we're going to focus on. Now, a visual impairment under the IDEA law is a impairment in vision that, even with correction, so even with glasses or contact lenses, adversely affects the child's educational performance. So any child that has a visual deficiency could qualify under this category And when I say qualify, that means they would qualify to have the IEP testing initiated. However, the testing itself has to show that the visual condition or any of the other categories has to show that that impairment adversely affects the child's educational performance. So it's not simply that I have this disability. It has to be affecting them with their schooling in order to qualify for services. So if they do qualify, then what is created is what's called an IEP, an Individualized Education Plan. And there are lots of rules and formal things that go along with this. And I went in depth in this in a previous webinar on the same platform that I believe is available. But if a child doesn't qualify for an IEP because it's found that the impairment is not affecting their educational performance, what they would most likely qualify for is a secondary law, which is called the Section 504 Plan. And this is a law that's part of the American Disabilities Act. And it is an anti-discrimination law. And it is geared towards providing equal access to anybody, whether you have a disability or not. And so my patients that have visual impairments would qualify under this category to receive certain accommodations in a classroom if they didn't qualify under the IEP. Now, there's a lot of differences and nuances between the two, and again, I'm not going to quite get into all the specifics, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have at the end about that. But I'm going to just go a little bit into the 504 Act. Its focus is to provide equal access and benefit from a school's curriculum, from access to the building, the programs, anything that a non-disabled peer has access to, a child with a disability also has to have access to in a modified way. So essentially, it's designed to level the playing field between all students. So the eligibility for a 504 plan is a little bit different. You simply have to have either a physical or a mental impairment that limits you in one major life activity. And what they consider major life activities are what I have listed here: walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, writing. All the ones I've underlined are ones that have a visual component to it. So it's not hard to qualify for a Section 504 plan with a visual impairment because it almost always impacts seeing, learning, reading, writing, those sorts of things. So if the student does not qualify under the IEP, they may qualify under the 504 plan. So in order to become eligible, in order to start the process of a 504 plan, what would be required is to have a comprehensive vision evaluation, if we're going to use vision as the criteria. And traditionally, that would need to be, I would recommend having that performed by a developmental optometrist, because they're going to get really into the depth of how it impacts the child in these areas, these major life areas. And you do need a comprehensive report that really clearly outlines how it is affecting the child. And then we need to specifically list the accommodations that we wish to have written within the Section 504 plan. And so those are some of the things we're going to get into next. So in this digital world, the accommodations I'm going to focus on tonight are going to be ones that are going to apply to our students that now have to spend all these hours in front of a computer screen. So one category that a lot of my patients have challenges with is with their visual motor function. And that is what I refer to as our eye-hand coordination. So think about writing as a prime example, probably the predominant one that we think of when we have challenges in this area. So some ideas that can be really helpful would be to use different types of lined paper. Depending on the age of the child, you may want to get paper that has raised lines on it, or a line that a different color that goes through the middle of the line as opposed to the upper and lower extents of the writing area. There's a lot of different types of paper out there that can really be helpful to have kids stay on the line that have difficulty with organization of spacing and just the production of writing in general. That's also where graph paper can become really helpful as well. that really can help with math and lining up numbers in columns. It can be really helpful. There's all different kinds of graph paper out there, not just the traditional one with black lines on them. There's some with extra large spacing, some with multiple colors on them that really help you organize where you're writing and what you're looking at. So just Google that and you'll find a lot of different kinds of paper out there. And a lot of them you can actually just download and print off your own computer. So you don't actually even have to go out and buy it. You could just print it. If you have a colored printer, it really helps with some of the colored ones. The other thing that I have on here is a slant board. And a slant board is something that I recommend to virtually every patient that comes into my office. This one in particular that I have on the slide here is one that I recommend and I provide in my office. And on the surface, it is a dry erase, so you can use it for writing and doodling and whatnot. It is magnetic, so it can hold your pieces of paper to it. It has the little clips at the top to hold your paper for writing. And then at the bottom, it has the little book holder, so you can rest a book on it. This one folds flat, so I really like it. There's a lot of different slant boards out there, but for any type of reading and writing activities, what it does is by tilting the work, it provides the most comfortable visual angle that allows our eyes to integrate together, and for writing to allow the eyes and the hand to work together in the most efficient manner. So you may recall when you went to school that we had a little wooden desk that had a little tilt to them. And that tilt was there for a reason. And over time, they somehow took it away and the desks are now flat. But it's really most important to really elevate the work. And it just makes it so much more comfortable for reading and writing. Now, if you can't find a slant board or purchase one, you could get a 3-ring binder that is empty. And it does provide almost a similar tilt. So you could use that in lieu of a slant board if you needed to. It's just going to be a little bit smaller and maybe a little more flexible. The other thing I have on here is just some pencil grips. And again, depending on the age of the child, certain types of pencils are more appropriate to help them really develop what we call that pincer grip, that holding the pencil with 3 fingers. When you're younger, the really big triangle pencils are my favorite. They really help put our fingers in that right position right from the get-go. However, for some older children that are using the smaller, the skinnier pencils, some of these pencil grips are really helpful because they help put your finger in those positions as well. So they can be really nice in helping to really improve the connection between the eyes and the hand so that you can see your pencil, the lead of the pencil while you're writing. And it can help with pressure when children tend to write too hard or too light. It can really help navigate that as well. So those are some suggestions for writing that can be really helpful. Now, for a child that may have some eye tracking problems, and by that I mean someone who may lose their place when they read or skip words or just lose their place when they get to the end of the margin and jumping back to the left margin, from the right to the left side. Some suggestions. Now, typically, anytime we can enlarge material, it's going to be easier for a child. Now, that's something that's really easy to do in the digital world. So having a tablet or a laptop, if we can enlarge font or just zoom in on a tablet, that's really going to help with eye tracking because it makes the print bigger. So whenever something's bigger, that means typically there's less text per page, there's less busyness, and then therefore less distractions or chance to lose your place. The other thing you could do, again, this is going to be more for a worksheet, is you could block off the material above where you're looking or below where you're looking, and that's going to limit some distractions. The other thing you can do if you are reading on a book is to use something that we call as a guided reader. And those are some examples down below. Those are highlighted guided readers, and they help draw your attention to the highlighted area, which can help with those tracking mistakes. They often also block off above and below the sentence and kind of give you a nice guide as to where to look. I did recently see somebody post online that there is an online version to this guided reader that kind of highlights one row at a time. and I wasn't able to write down the name of it when I saw it really quickly, but that would be something to Google, that they do have some electronic version of this now. So that would be really nice to try. Again, here for reading, I do recommend the slant board, like I mentioned. And the other thing, if we're doing more, if we do have some paper assignments, is to pull out those highlighters. That really helps with underlining, bolding, drawing attention to certain areas. If you're able to do that on your paperwork, highlighting items, especially for older kids, helps draw their awareness to the areas that they need to go back and look if they're studying. It can really make things nice to do that. The other thing that is very similar to that electronic guided reader that I was mentioning, but it's kind of a step above, is something that we call text-to-speech software. And what that is if you are trying to read a digital book, it actually, the computer will read it to you, but it scans along the sentence, kind of like a highlighter, so you can read it and watch it, but you hear it at the same time. And so there are a lot of different text-to-speech software programs out there. Natural Reader is one I've had a lot of patients use. Dragon is another one. It tends to be more maybe for the older, a little bit of an older child. There's D-Speech, and then there's a lot of other ones out there. There are a lot that are free, especially with COVID area. There's a lot that have come out that allow, that we're able to use now that we didn't before. So I would just suggest Googling one. If you do have a child that does have some difficulty with reading, this can really be nice because they can attempt to read it but also hear it at the same time. So that is an accommodation that I often write into a 504 plan for a child that is attending real school. And again, if your child is in school, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, these are some things that we could write into a 504 plan so that your child could have them in the classroom. However, if you are doing home learning, these are things that you could attempt to implement at home. Now, one of my favorite things that I'm recommending for all of our patients is, if possible, to project your laptop onto your television. What that's going to do is take the near visual world and get it out in space. We don't want things super close to our face because that really causes a lot of eye strain, a lot of fatigue. It can cause blurry vision. It can cause double vision and headaches if you do it long enough. So if you're able to, a lot of times you'll either just need an HDMI cable or a VGA cable, depending on your laptop, and plug it into the back of your TV. You should be able to project it right onto the screen. You could still keep your laptop closer, that if you do need to respond to anything on your laptop, you could, but just being able to take it and push it away, 5 to 10 feet away, would be really helpful. So I'm suggesting that if it's possible for everybody. Now, what if a child has some perceptual weaknesses with their visual system? Now, these are some suggestions, and again, it all depends on the age of the child. So for the really young children, I would suggest having in front of them when they're doing their assignments is to provide them a number line and a letter line. And the letters are usually upper and lowercase. A number line could be 1 to 20, or you could have what I call a 100 grid that's 10 by 10. So you can count by 10s, you can count by 2s, you go down the column. So you could have that kind of access to them right next to their workspace. So they will be able to have that information close by. In a lot of elementary classrooms, these things are posted on the walls. So think of anything that your child may have in their classroom that's on the wall all around the room. Having a smaller version of that close to them would be really helpful. A lot of times I recommend that children have this right next to them on their desk, and I'll write this into a 504 plan because it will minimize their challenge of trying to find it on the wall in the classroom. So we want it closer. Or some teachers may post the words of the week on the wall, the sight words. We want them closer. It's just going to eliminate some errors when children have trouble finding things in a busy classroom. The other thing on here that can be really helpful when learning a lot of concepts that involve those spatial discrimination and perceptual skills would be to have a lot of different manipulatives available. So some examples If we're learning fractions, can we make up the fractions and have the little pieces so we can hold them and touch them? Learning time, counting money, those are just some examples. But having things to actually physically count and touch, those are what we call manipulatives. We can organize them in certain patterns and use them to help us with those spatial concepts, and in particular learning the concept of number and math and fractions, those sorts of things. So you may already have some things similar at home. Teachers most likely and hopefully will be sending you some versions of this that you can print and cut. They're out there. If they don't send them to you, you can certainly Google them, and there's versions that you can print at home on a printer and cut, or you could purchase some stuff like this online. There's a lot of kits like this available that can kind of give you a variety of things that can help children, in particular with math. All right, now just in general, how can we help them improve concentration or minimize eye strain? Because, you know, kids aren't meant to be looking at a digital device for the amount of time they're anticipated to right now. So one thing that is really, really important is to make sure, take a look at your child's plan. How long do they have to be in front of that screen? When do they get their breaks? Do they get any movement breaks? If it's not something that I feel that child can handle based purely on their visual challenges, I'm going to be requesting a different structure for them. And I've already done that for several of my patients that already have 504 plans. We've had to modify it now that they're doing online learning. And so the most common problem I'm hearing is that they're expected to sit for X amount of time that's just not going to work for them. So some things you could do if you want to try to manipulate it, like I said, push it further away is going to be helpful. These little chairs, the exercise ball chairs, are fabulous. They just give them add a little bit of movement even when they're sitting. It increases their core strength. It kind of helps keep their brain and body busy while they're, learning. This version isn't a chair, but some older kids just sit on the actual larger ball. You do want to try to get a version where their feet touch the ground, though. That's really important. So if you have a younger child, get a smaller yoga ball. If your child's older, you can get the larger size, but they come in a lot of different sizes. Try to take those movement breaks whenever you can. And whenever they do get those recess breaks, or if they're put in a group where they're no longer with their teacher and they're expected to do their own assignment, try to assess what it is at first, but try to make sure that asynchronous time when they're not directly with their teacher is not on the screen if possible, so that they're actually doing their traditional work on a book, on paper, on something that's not looking at the screen anymore. And when possible, throw in some movement breaks. Just kind of examples, some line walking, some jumping jacks, cartwheels, some somersaults, something to just get that body moving again. Some of my patients need that break every 15 minutes. It really depends on the child, depends on, for me, their visual condition. But if we need to change the schedule, that's something that we can write within the 504 plan to accommodate for them. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is just lighting. Lighting can be a big issue with a lot of children with vision issues. So again, depending on the arrangement you have set up for your workspace, we want to try to minimize glare on the screen, which is pretty obvious because that will cause a lot of fatigue. We want to avoid fluorescent bulbs, which most of us at home probably don't have those, which is good. It's great to have some natural lighting, but you don't want it to interfere with the screen. So sometimes having your screen towards the window provides the background lighting, but not the glare on the monitor. And having a task light specifically, like on this desk, this little task lamp, is really great to have less glare and more direct lighting over the desk. And you may find you need to change position in the room depending on the time of day. In the morning, the sun may come through the window one way, but different in the afternoon. So you're going to have to kind of just pay attention to that because these sorts of challenges can often cause headaches and eye strain. So just be aware of that. As you're navigating this kind of environment with your children. All right, the blue light effect. I have had a lot of questions about blue light filtering glasses. Do children really need them? And there's a lot of research out there about the effects of blue light, and there's two main things that blue light has been shown to do in the research. One of them is that in very high doses, blue light can actually damage portions of the retina. However, if you really look into the research of it, the amount of blue light that you need in order to physically damage the eye is so much higher than you're ever going to get from a digital device. However, the secondary thing that blue light does do is that it does impact the release of melatonin, and it can disrupt your sleep cycle. So out of everything that blue light can do, I would suggest avoiding using a digital device at least an hour before bedtime. That's really going to prevent the disruption to the sleep cycle. As far as the blue light affecting and damaging the retina, I really don't think that's going to be an issue. However, a lot of our children can really benefit from lenses to help relax the focusing system and relax their eyes. So if your child has never had a vision exam with an optometrist, you really want to make sure that they have one. The statistics say that only about 25% of school-age children have ever had a vision exam. So with this new digital world, we're probably going to end up with a lot more kids having visual problems. So a lot of times we can use lenses and glasses preventatively to prevent some adverse effects, and particularly with a lot of screen time. So having a routine vision exam would be really important. Now, if you have a child that has other visual issues that may have done vision therapy or is in vision therapy or is just now in this new world is going to have more issues, we are going to want to try to put some things in effect into perhaps a 504 plan, or if we can try to do some of these accommodations at home. But in that situation, you do want to look for a provider that does a more detailed developmental vision exam, which is going to primarily be with a developmental optometrist, which is going to be a little significantly more involved as an evaluation. But at that point, we may find that some lenses to help reduce and prevent eye strain would be really beneficial. And then in that case, we may want to put the blue light blocking filter on the glasses, or we may put something else in the lenses that help protect the eyes and from eye strain. But the other thing that I was going to mention is that almost all apps and tablets and computers, you do have the ability to download a blue light blocking filter onto your screen. And a lot of them are free. So I know all of the app stores have them. Just type in blue light blocking filter, and they're going to basically just change the shade of what you see, but that's really preventing that blue light from entering in the eye. So that's a great thing to do, especially on our phones. You may have seen even on your phone that there's such a thing as night mode, kind of the same idea. So if your child is on a phone or a tablet, those are really easy to do, or you could try to get one on a desktop as well, so that you don't necessarily need it in your glasses if you have it on your screen. Okay, so kind of talking about screens again, one thing that I would really recommend that if your child is in online learning and that is spending 4, 5, 6 hours in front of a screen, try to minimize their extra free time and try to eliminate extra screen time that they normally would have as a reward. And really try to encourage movement, especially for recess, anytime you can, even in wintertime. Just any kind of movement is really going to help. You really want to take the eyes away from focusing close up and converging inward and getting them to take in more space and get them looking outward. The effects of excessive screen time, not only, we have that blue light that we talked about can interrupt sleep. Studies have shown that it does, excessive screen time can slow speech development. It can decrease attention and concentration. Some studies show that it decreases cognitive abilities. And we know it can cause visual fatigue and eye strain and can create more nearsightedness over time. So while we know we need to use the screen for our online learning now, let's try to minimize it for other things and think of other things that we can do that don't involve screens. Okay, so that's the end of my little presentation, and now I'd love to take questions if anyone has any. Colin can see any or can throw some out if anything I've missed, and we'll go from there.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kungle. And as she said, you can go ahead and use that chat feature there if you have questions. You can type them publicly or privately here. She also has her contact information there for you. One question we do have here, a question about IEPs. Is it possible for public school, or do you know of situations where public schools have given children an IEP under the visual impairment category based on the diagnosis of CI?
Yes. Well, I know many students that have qualified for the testing under the diagnosis of convergence insufficiency. I have had one student qualify for services as a result of it, and I've had several that did not qualify. So the student that did qualify was because he was having significant double vision that impacted his reading. And while an IEP, they can accept outside reports, they still have to do their own testing. And they do have to demonstrate in their testing that whatever the disability category is, it has to impact them in school. And so for my one patient, it was obvious that his double vision caused by convergence insufficiency was impacting his reading. So he was awarded services through an IEP. However, I have had other students that have had convergence problems that maybe weren't as severe, and they just caused more headaches or eye strain, but the student was still reading at a normal level, normal speed, and it wasn't impacting their grades or their tests or anything that they could demonstrate the decline in the performance. So that student did not get an IEP, but they did qualify for accommodations under a 504 plan. So just because they don't qualify for the IEP, it doesn't mean they can't still get some accommodations. And that's one of the primary differences. In a 504 plan, you typically don't get extra services with a special ed teacher or a reading teacher or an occupational therapist or speech therapist, but you can get the accommodations such as extra time on tests, a quiet room for your tests, special sized enlarged documents, you can get tablets, you can get all different things that we could request that could help the student manage the condition themselves without an extra person or a different protocol. I hope that answered that.
Okay. We have another question here about a child. She finished vision therapy for convergence insufficiency, but now with all of the online learning, she's doing 6 hours a day online. Is there a chance for any regression, and should we still pursue some kind of plan or accommodation?
I would say there probably is a chance for regression. When, if this student finished a vision therapy program, typically in my office after a program, we will provide some recommendations for some home activities to do to slowly kind of wean off of the program. So I may suggest in this situation to maybe go back and do some of those activities a few times a week just to make sure we haven't lost some of those skills. You may want to consider having another follow-up appointment with a doctor and looking into maybe some lenses that can help relax the eyes, for that amount of work on a computer is pretty high. And the other thing is we could certainly look into accommodations. I would probably put that as like the third thing I would then look into doing to see if you know, lenses didn't help alleviate anything and a little bit of practice didn't. We certainly could try to write into a plan to cut down the amount of time we're spending on the screen and giving some other work that would be considered more traditional work, where she would be doing, or he would be doing work at a desk with pencil paper as opposed to a screen. So those would be my suggestions in that area. But you probably would also want to consult with the doctor that you dealt with originally as well. They may have some other suggestions for you based on the case.
Okay. We've got another parent here. She's got 2 sons that are doing home virtual learning from home, again, full day. It's day 2, and they're already complaining of sore, watery eyes. What should she do?
All right. So I would, first off, I would suggest having a comprehensive vision exam. That would be where I would start. It may be something that could be alleviated with a little bit of some stress-relieving lenses, so that may help. Some of the other suggestions I mentioned in the presentation would probably also help, trying to get further from the screen, projecting it on your TV, taking some extra breaks when you can, and then try to avoid screens at other times during the day. Those things can help. I think lenses would probably be my first suggestion. So seeking out someone who could do a comprehensive vision exam and someone with familiar with pediatrics would be my first suggestion.
Okay, and they have a follow-up to that. You mentioned stress-relieving lenses. Are those the same as blue light filtering lenses or not?
They are not. So when we prescribe glasses, oftentimes we'll prescribe lenses in a preventative way. And so we can prescribe lenses that help take away some of the stress from the focusing system. So our eyes essentially can be a little more relaxed. And so I often, other people may call them reading glasses, but for young children, it's not really meant to help them see clearer. They're meant to help relax the focusing system and relieve some of the stress. So that's why I often call them stress-relieving lenses. So other people may call them reading glasses, but in children, they're really designed to take away the strain so that they have less teary eyes, watery eyes, and potential headaches. The blue light glasses are simply a filter that's put over the lens that can block the blue light that's emitted from a digital device. So it is very different. You can combine the two into one. There's also anti-glare coatings that can be put on glasses. Mine have them. You might see I have kind of like a blue reflection on my glasses. That is just for glare purposes. That's often also very helpful for a lens for someone who has to look at a screen all the time. So those are slightly different, but they can be combined into the same thing.
Okay. All right, we have somebody writing in here. My daughter has visual processing disorder, and we're pursuing a 504 plan. What accommodations might you suggest?
Okay, so it's the accommodations. There's a lot of different ones out there, but every report that I write, they're very, very specific to the individual. So it does depend on the child's age, their grade level, the environment of the classroom setting. Is it a very large classroom, a small classroom setting? And then what specific challenge that may be presenting. So is it a challenge with is it visual perceptual? Is it a challenge with recognition of spatial information of symbols, letters, and numbers? Is it a challenge with memory and remembering what you see? Or is it a challenge with thinking in your mind's eye? So really, I would need to know specifically what challenge it would be, but just some of the things in general that I mentioned before would be to have a lot of manipulatives available that allows you to see it and touch it and feel it and think through a problem. That can really help with that visualization piece. It can help with the discrimination piece as well. The number lines, letter lines can be helpful if the child is younger. Those are some of the most common ones. There are probably a lot of other ones out there too, but it really have to know a lot of detail about the child and perhaps even see the environment that they're in the classroom to really get a sense of what might be helpful. So a lot of my evaluations and my reports, I really have to take all that into account to really come up with the best solution. If your provider is not doing that, you certainly could even reach out to an advocate. There are lots of advocates out there that are very well versed in some things that could potentially be helpful, and they've dealt with a lot of children with similar problems. That's another avenue that you can look into that can be really helpful in trying to create the best 504 plan for your child.
Okay. Do you have any resources for helping to find advocates?
Okay. You know, I had some resources at the end, and then I took the slide out. I wasn't sure we were going to get into that detail. There is an organization called COPA, and it's the Council of Parents and Advocates and Attorneys, I believe. And it's a national group, and so it's COPAA, COPA, and they have advocates and attorneys as members. So I would search for that. Depending on where you are, my local area has some local Facebook groups that have advocates in the area. So I'm sure if you search for Facebook and looked for student advocates, there's parent advocacy councils. That's one of the name of the ones in Maryland where I am. That's one way to start to find them. If you're struggling to find one, I have an advocate that works on staff with me, and she helps me with all of my patients and their visual needs. So just send me an email and I can link you up with her, and she has a lot of resources and networks of other advocates across the country that I can't think of at the moment that I can shoot your way. So just send me an email and I can get you a more detailed list as well if you're having trouble finding one.
Okay. I don't have any other questions here. Does anybody else there have questions they'd like to send in for Dr. Kungle at the moment? All right. Was there anything you'd like to expand upon, or anything you didn't get to, Dr. Kungle?
No, I just know that I'm available if you have any questions. And then, like I said, I have an advocate that works for me, and she's also available to do little free 20-minute consults if you have any questions. She's happy to chat with anybody as well. Her name is Sarah. So again, just contact me or contact our office, and I'm happy to direct you to her or help answer any questions you might have moving forward. So please feel free to reach out to me.